In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful, and then it gets rather, I guess I would call it, distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved, something I would not want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mecha Godzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy Ghidorah music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional. After the first 2 questions at the start, the quiz started to take on a darker tone. Question 1. Do you like iced cream? Answer yes, reaction weird face 1. Question 2. Do you like the clowns? Answer yes, reaction weird face 10. Question 3. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer yes, reaction weird face 2. Question 4. Do you have any regrets? Answer yes, reaction hurt. Question 5. Do some people deserve to die? Answer no, reaction weird face 3. Question 6. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer yes, reaction weird face 5. Question 7. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer yes, reaction weird face 10. Question 8. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer no, reaction weird face 7. Question 9. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer no, reaction angry. Question 10. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer no, reaction weird face 4. Question 11. Does life have any real meaning? Answer no, reaction love. Question 12. Do you like Mothra? I knew that last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I had no idea what the result would be, and I answered honestly, because I said before, I never liked playing as Mothra. Nobody liked playing as Mothra in this game, and there was a good reason for it. Every other time Mothra gets hit, she gets slammed back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Mothra has is being able to fly over some obstacles in some levels. So I answered no, and Face actually replied back. Not only with the maniacal expression, but with the text, "Too bad!" I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus had disappeared from the board, leaving only Mothra. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed, but there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet even if I had said yes, I would have been stuck with Mothra anyway. Face giveth, and face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first world ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me. Even more than the previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. I've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all those trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact I was stuck as Mothra didn't help. Playing the game's previous worlds as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery, being in control of the king of the monsters. I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way. It's not like that with Mothra. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug, traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. Gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were these strange, long-legged, deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around. I went to approach them, and they ran away. I thought about shooting one with an I-beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of these deer-like creatures and two new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing onto a tree, and hairy raptor-esque beasts that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather I was traveling through a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I got too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but the confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, I chose whether I wanted to play these levels with the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not what I expected. When I pressed the button to start a level on the TV screen like I normally would, this screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which was the goofy Ghidorah music that used to be playing on the quiz levels. I was somewhat unsettled by this because it was just so strange. Also, I found it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that just looked like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect of the rest of these icons. I went to an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level, all brown with time measuring instruments floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen, and very early in the level I encountered something else I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game, and not just that, there seemed to be a whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks that were normally immobile could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about the level was the coloured hourglass items. There were about 3 of these, that I'll get into now. The first one was a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. The second one was a red hourglass that made time speed up and fill the level with enemies from the future. And the third one was a green hourglass that made time go to normal speed and filled the level with enemies from the original game. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down and I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all of these enemies represent real animals. The level went into another segment and I encountered the green hourglass. Then I fought the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots, but the last segment, the red hourglass appeared, and the enemies from the future appeared. Now, whether or not the game was trying to show me 8-bit renditions of creatures that might actually exist thousands of years from now, I have no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it was made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called Trudon Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one type of future enemy that I encountered only once, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but the sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful. and I supposed it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I'd lost fighting it, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Mothra alone. After the previous level, I call Time Warp, the next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was a short looping of an ambient synthesizer song. Listening to it made me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself, and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking when I was playing this level. The enemies all appeared to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waste to spit projectiles. There was also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level I saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of a barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try to make it stop, but then a flock of these skullbirds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quick from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most normal, in that there was little deviance from the move forward, smash things formula of the original game. I encountered more creatures through the level, like tentacle blobs and some kind of deformed thing with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking it into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of skullbirds now and then. And at the end of the level, there was a large bluish-green lake, where I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of a monster with a long neck and a whale's skull. It attacks with a mouth projectile and by charging into you. It also could go underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from Time Warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the nearest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was a white tree, and as I guessed, this level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel unnerved starting with this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song that almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress-relieving, and the forest itself looked far less ominous covered in snow. I travelled through the first segment enjoying the atmosphere for about 4 minutes, when suddenly I realised something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the animals? Soon after I left the screen, and the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I started to feel suspicious. But then I reminded myself there were other empty levels in the game, and this one was likely another one of those. But then I heard something familiar. It was a 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Cold starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across a horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. Upon closer inspection, they were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state, and sure enough, I did. A creature very much like the beaked sloth, except this thing had white fur and was more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors, who must have sensed something was still alive, came rushing from the right side of the screen. The beaked gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it, and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from their temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seemed to have all gone insane. They attacked everything in sight, and one was running back and forth, clawing at nothing. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. After I left this second segment, I saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors seemed to be blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen, but in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain, with a bright grey moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned. And immediately, I started to feel dread. This is gonna sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. This game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake, and the moon moved down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell down into the lake, and the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence, and then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus I was introduced to a monster I call the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight, and it was the most difficult fight yet, stronger than any of the previous bosses. This creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gigan's Saw, because if it had, I would have never won this. I barely had 3 bars of health left when I finally killed this abomination. But what happened afterwards is hardly what I would call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts, because I don't like bringing this experience back into my head unless I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expressions she had before. She would speak very clearly, without any hint of emotion, and when it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in words, and I won't try. You had to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran into traffic. I tried to stop her, but I was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked into her eyes when the wheels went over her neck. That sight always haunted me. I know that the game knows about it, because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened.
Melissa, kill yourself. Kill.
After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could do not to burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go this far, or that it even was capable of doing what it just did. I could feel my brain going haywire as I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? It didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then I could no longer deny what seemed obvious now. The game is alive, and not only that, it also can establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my head, or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelation, I really wanted to see this through to the end, even more than I did before I beat dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I tried to restart the game, it might go back to being normal. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn off the TV just in case I felt I was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug off the wall or just run out of the room. Surely, that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV, and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few minutes to calm my nerves, then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV screen icon right below the white forest I had just left, and because of the first animation being so bizarre, I figured I'd try another one to see what happens. Although I expected the same animation, I got a totally different one. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board music. Seeing as it was a fishman and all, it was fitting, I suppose. I can't help but wonder what the point of these were. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that. It started up in a gold labyrinth level. My health and power were refilled. Not sure how or why. But I was glad not to be heading into the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed my Mothra sprite had shrunk to half its original size. The music was a slow, ominous drum beat, with female vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite haunting. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have been played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seemed necessary just to get around this place. Another thing that caught my attention was when you go to the left, your monster actually turns and faces the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but in the original game, you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move to the left, your monster ended up walking or flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size, because every time I thought I had reached the end of it, or thought I was going to end up back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. And I found one statue face at a dead end with a wide, open stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still had the same expression. I can't help but feel like something is really staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in the level, lacking any kind of hover ability. Like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't long after I found it that a flying machine swooped in and grabbed it, and then flew off with it. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it, to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the centre. The machine hovered over to the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature came out from the hole in the side of the cauldron, now adorned with the same gold colour as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the board, I realised that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. It made planning my route throughout Entropy easier. There were still 2 new icons to explore, the Indigo Cliffs and a black version of the labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black labyrinth icons which were surrounded by the bosses, I played the Indigo Cliffs first. It was a lot like the blue or green mountains. The levels had the same shredded look to them. There's also a recolor of the clouds and moon from the toxic waste dump. The music, if you can call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. The first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads, emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on their route, and more emerged from the cave until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked that upon reaching the cliff, all the creatures began jumping off into the abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. Very unsettling way to start off a level. I continued flying over various strange animals like the ones shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by large birds, which I'm very certain are Sprite versions of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I defeated the condors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seemed to be so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps these creatures in these levels are also alive, and somehow have very unhappy lives, if this behaviour is any indication. But what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspect that the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of the bobbleheads marching up to a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me, so acting on impulse I fired off eye-beams at both the monster and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless, but was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Batra first, then Megalon. After that I would watch the last TV screen, play the Black Labyrinth, and fight Mecha Godzilla. And lastly, go through the chase with the Hell Beast. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, time to beat up Batra. As I expected, he started off in his larva form. The music was Varan's battle theme. Whenever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, that other form always has to show up. For a game that's otherwise inexplainable, it's rather startling in its consistency and accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The fight started off simple. Larva Batra fought in a similar fashion as Maguma did, charging back and forth, then firing off lightning from its horn occasionally. During the fight, I noticed Mothra's combat capabilities had been altered in my favour. 1. The I-beams did twice as much damage as they did originally. Now they were as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit the enemies when you used it. In the original game, even though Mothra could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back the same way as if you just ran straight into them, which was extremely annoying, but not anymore. I could change direction and fly around, which was a big help. Fighting Imago Batra is just like fighting a clone Mothra. Although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger, no longer impeded by its slow-moving larva form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the horn lightning, it now had a more powerful I-beam. Batra could change direction just like you could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like, but first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level, and shot through a lot of creatures for the health power-ups. So about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense, since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one, and so far only, film appearance. He was a lot like Mogira, but faster and with more weapons. He'd start off charging with his drills. I liked to fly back and forth around him, and this seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around and start spitting out grenades. Those were a pain because they would bounce when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under and then shoot him with I-beams. Overall, I describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was now nearing the end of Entropy. I had just taken down Megalon, and I started up the last TV screen to see what I'd get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was the password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent compared to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went on to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe, like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't before. Most likely it was the tension from all that had happened in the game was starting to get to me, but who knows. The last level type in Entropy is what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambiance, similar to the unforgiving Cold loop, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I travelled through the maze for about a minute, and I noticed there weren't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which was overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then, this might be a good thing. Maybe there weren't any obstacles and I could get through this level with ease. That's when the screen went dark. And immediately, I snapped out of my daze from a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the Mothra sprite. I couldn't tell where I was going, and I ended up frantically running into walls. I heard a noise. The sound of a crowd running through a hallway. And along with that running came the roars, loud roaring sounds, which I could describe as something like a rabid dog the size of an elephant screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever was making this noise, there were lots of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing that I got to see what my pursuers looked like. But at the time I couldn't see where they were, or where I was going. I was literally running blind, and this mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was, no! as I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half my total health. When I was saved, the light came back on and the attackers had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exit before the lights go out and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in panic mode now, moving as fast as I could while trying every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out a total of 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead meat had it not been for one of the wide-eyed statues. As I stayed close to it, the monsters all seemed to avoid me until the light came back on. The statues warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I stayed near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end, but before the exit there was a row of halls leading straight down, with no way out once you entered. You either got to the exit before the monsters reached you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss left. Mecha Godzilla. I started the battle, and I got something unexpected. Not only had my life shot back up to 100%, it seems to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. Mecha Godzilla started off like fighting a clone Godzilla, but this disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually a transformation only occurred at the halfway point. At this point, it was like fighting Mecha Godzilla from the normal game. Felt kinda nice to fight one of the original enemies from the game for a change. Although he wasn't exactly like normal, he also had the rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him into the corner and hitting him with I-beams in a spot where he can't hit me. But that was always a cheap trick anyways. But after getting down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His sprite started to glitch, much in the same way Godzilla had back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to form a new shape. And thus the game had created not Mecha Godzilla. And I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreating things. The human face on this one gives it a very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters, and it had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was a lot slower than its original counterpart, and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by constantly staying out of its line, bombarding the machine with poison powder as I flew over it. One last thing to do. The Hell Beast chase. Oh boy. Might as well just get this over with, I thought to myself. The Entropy end chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid it would be. A labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run in the right direction and not get touched. But this took out all the simplicity from it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth was, or where the exit was. And now, not only did I have to constantly backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. For those first 30 seconds, it didn't show up, but I knew it would. And as I started picking up the pace, I heard loud flapping noises. And there it was, in a flying form. It flew with bat-like wings, and it was as fast and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this was probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases. And as such, I had to keep my focus on the game and not taking screen caps. However, I did take one of the red monster doing something I found very interesting. I'd managed to lose it by going through a different path than it apparently expected, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth, or so I thought. It tried clawing through the wall for a second before opening up its mouth and tearing the wall apart with the intestine jaws. But for those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back, they might have been the key to me finding the exit. The path to the exit was long and complex, but from what I remember, I went up, then back towards the left. Not sure why I chose that particular way. Just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I hoped that it wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 worlds left to go. Next was the penultimate world, called Extus.